If it seems like Brexit has been happening for a long time, that's because it has. It's been over 3 years since British voters decided to leave the European Union by a very narrow 52 to 48% majority. That was back in June 2016. In November 2018, then British Prime Minister Theresa May and EU leaders reached agreement on the Brexit divorce, which included the withdrawal agreement outlining the divorce arrangements and the political declaration on what the future relationship looked like. In 2019, Theresa May brought that deal to Parliament 3 times, and it was voted down 3 times. The EU has granted Britain 2 extensions. The current deadline is October 31st, Halloween. This summer, Boris Johnson replaced Theresa May as Prime Minister. He has taken a much harder line on Brexit, pledging do or die the UK will leave the European Union by October 31st. In early September, the British Parliament returned from its summer recess. At that time, Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced that he was going to suspend Parliament for 5 weeks. Although he argued that this was a normal procedure, critics have argued that it was done with the explicit purpose of preventing Parliament from being able to debate Brexit. This case has gone to the courts. Before Parliament was suspended, it passed legislation trying to prevent no deal. The legislation says that the British government has until the October 17th to 18th European Council meeting to reach agreement on a new deal, or to get Parliament's agreement specifically for the UK to leave the EU with no deal. If neither of those things is done by October 19th, Parliament has said that he needs to ask the EU for an extension. Boris Johnson claims that he prefers to leave the European Union with a deal. The question is whether or not he can reach an agreement on a deal that's going to be acceptable to the EU leaders, to his government, and to the British Parliament. Negotiations are going on now between his officials and EU officials. The biggest obstacle to reaching agreement on Brexit has always been the backstop for Northern Ireland. Some people have suggested that the current backstop, which currently applies to the entire UK, could be revised to apply only to Northern Ireland. Others are skeptical that this will be acceptable to all sides, and others are skeptical about whether or not there is a majority in Parliament to vote on any sort of deal. Boris Johnson is also beginning to run out of time. It is very clear that elections are going to have to be held at some point this fall. Boris Johnson is currently 43 seats short of a majority in Parliament. This means that he does not have a governing majority, which will make it very difficult for him to pass legislation. There is a lot of debate right now about the timing of these elections. The British Parliament voted against holding elections before the middle of October, given the uncertainty about Brexit. They are much more enthused about holding elections after an extension is granted for Brexit or some sort of deal is reached. Elections are going to be a gamble for both parties. Boris Johnson's Conservative Party has raised a lot of frustration within the country given their inability to deliver on Brexit. He is also facing a lot of pressure from Nigel Farage and his Brexit Party, who are insistent that the UK must leave the European Union. At the same time, Jeremy Corbyn, who's the leader of the Labour Party, is very unpopular within the country. And so voters are going to have to make a decision that's based on their views of Brexit, their views of which party's domestic policy agenda they want to see for the next 5 years, and which of the party leaders they think should be Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.